This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, teambuildr.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Canadian Border Services Officer and the man behind the 10-8 podcast, Christian Lane. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into law enforcement, the multiple roles he held as he progressed through the ranks, immigration, drug prohibition, human trafficking, transition, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Christian Lane. Enjoy. Well, Christian, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Steve Farina, for connecting us. And secondly, to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, thank you very much, James. It's an absolute honor to be here. I full disclosure, I obviously wanted to prepare myself a little bit, so I gave a few episodes a listen, and I was tickled to hear Thanos on one of the episodes. Josh Brolin you had on, which is fantastic. I'm a huge Marvel fan. And I think Josh Brolin's just a terrific actor anyway, but it was really, really cool to hear him on and hear, the galaxy's most hideous villain coming live and in person on the Behind the Shield podcast. And Steve's just a beautiful person. He's a beautiful human being. I had the pleasure of interviewing him on my show some years back, and we've stayed connected ever since. So I'm grateful to him for the connection with you.
Absolutely. And likewise. All right. Well, then, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
At the moment, you find me in the beautiful Fraser Valley, British Columbia, just about an hour and a bit east of Vancouver, which I would hope most American listeners are familiar with. We've hosted the Olympics and Expo and all manner of other events. But just an hour east, sort of a suburb bedroom community of Vancouver. But soon to be relocating to Vancouver Island, an even more beautiful place to live in BC.
Beautiful. Well, I hope most Americans know Vancouver for the groover from Vancouver, Bryan Adams, who I think is
Yes,
probably your national treasure, huh?
you're so okay. You're kind of dating yourself a little bit with the Bryan Adams reference, but yeah, you're absolutely right. The groover from Vancouver, also home to Michael Bublé, and the great Ryan Reynolds, who incidentally I went to high school with. He was 2 grades back of me, but we were definitely in the same high school together. He was in my sister's grade, and lovely to see a Kitsilano secondary alumni making it as far and as famous as he's made it. So
Brilliant. What does your sister remember, if anything? Was he a kind of class clown back then, or was it a kind of late blooming?
he was definitely a theater kid. She was very much into the performing arts. I tried to go the sports path. We can talk about that a little later on. I shouldn't have. I'm more into the creativity and theatrical side of things, as it turns out. But no, he was very much a theater kid, and one of those talents that I think everybody knew was going to go somewhere. It wasn't just a mom and dad's sweetheart, playing roles in community plays and school plays and that sort of thing. Like you could tell he had something.
Brilliant. All right, well, let's go to your early life then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. So I was born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia, to my father, who was English born, moved to Canada with his folks at about the age of 11. His dad, my grandfather, a World War II veteran, flew from 39 to 45 in the RAF, survived as a navigator on board a Lancaster, survived every sortie he'd flown, which statistically is phenomenal. It certainly runs counter to the survival rates for most flyers during that war. And my mom, Canadian born, born to parents of Scottish and Irish ancestry. So I'm a true British mutt, through and through. And I have a younger sister, as I mentioned. We're 18 months apart. It was funny. I was chatting with my mom. We speak daily, and she was sharing this story with me about when my sister was born and I was 18 months old. So, a year and a half. Can't be too faulted for my actions at the time, but I was not happy that my sister was around. This was not a welcome experience in my life, evidently. And I made it very, very well known to my mother in particular, that I was very displeased with the three of us being disrupted by a fourth. In terms of family dynamics, my parents divorced when I was about 10 or 11 years old. And my dad in particular was, I'm putting this very delicately, but he's no longer with us. He passed away in 2017, but he was a very difficult individual. You've heard the expression hurt people.
Yes.
Yeah. My dad was hurting a lot. And that framed a childhood for me and my sister. And I won't speak for her experience, because this is the interesting thing about family dynamics: is two children can grow up in the exact same home, in the exact same address, experience the exact same circumstance in that home, but they're seeing it very, very differently. Like, their life that they lead is very different than their siblings' life. So I don't want to speak for her. She and I talk about this a fair bit, but dad was not easy to be around. He, at his best, it was usually after he smoked a joint, out in the garage. He was, doing puttering or whatever he was doing in the garage, and then he'd come back in and he was in much better spirits. But more often than not, something was going on in his life, something was going on inside him that he didn't like and didn't know how to address in a healthy way. And so he visited that typically out through anger and aggression, and physical and emotional abuse to me, my sister, and my mom. So grew up in a home that certainly had its share of domestic violence, and that kind of set the foundation for, as it does for all of us, right? When we're growing up, we're learning how to be as human beings, and the number one and two teachers we'll ever see in our lifetimes are our parents, right? And then a little bit our siblings, and then school chums, and that sort of thing. So, the foundation, when the foundation's rocky, as I've learned, when the foundation's a little bit rocky, and you're building on top of that rocky foundation, eventually everything is going to come down. And as a firefighter, I'm sure you can appreciate that too, or a former firefighter, I'm sure you can appreciate that too, right? The houses that are built on the shittiest foundations, when they go through a significant, whether it's an earthquake type event or a significant fire or structure crisis, they're going to collapse. And that's kind of where I found myself at 48 years old and change. But we can get into that maybe a little later down the line.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because I just last year wrote a book, and I'm in the process of making it into a TV show. And one of the main themes is generational trauma. I don't think, and I've just had this awakening through this podcast. I mean, it's not like I, had this figured out years ago. It's listening to all these stories, and then, people on the psychology side as well. But for example, there's a romanticization of the World War II generation, and they just came back and they rolled up their sleeves and they got back to work. And then you hear about, and I'll ask you about yours, but you hear about, many of these grandfathers in this case, and they weren't okay. How can you be okay from coming back from that and then just being thrust back into society again? So clearly, as you said, there were some issues in your dad's foundation. Have you had any ability to unpack his upbringing and some of those domino effects?
To some degree, yes, but largely no. It's an interesting question, because you're right. I think we have romanticized the great generation, and I'm not taking anything away from what the men and women of that generation did, and the sacrifices they made, and how they stepped up and served. I'm not taking anything away, but I don't see how you can go through a world war in however way that touches you without being scarred and injured, whether physically, emotionally, or psychologically, or spiritually. And, as we've evolved as a society, I think we're getting better slowly at understanding those kinds of impacts. But with my dad's family, my dad grew up with 3 brothers and 2 adopted sisters eventually. And one of the eldest brother. So my grandpa, when he went off to war, returned to his firstborn not being his firstborn.
Gotcha.
And that was a family secret that was kept up until my uncle, my dad's oldest brother, until he passed, which gives you an idea of just how open or not, my father's family in particular was around issues of any sort of significant import like that, right? Go back a little bit further, my great grandmother had her special friend that lived with her. We called her Auntie Elsie. And, it was only ever just a special friend, but in reality, they were lovers. My great grandmother was a lesbian, but that wasn't talked about. So that gives you, I think that gives a pretty accurate illustration of the family dynamic and how open it really was or not. And so unpacking, the best I've been able to get with my dad, and it's only piecing little pieces of the puzzle together from my memory, from bits and pieces of conversations with his brothers, and family stories here and there that I can, vaguely recall. But the best I can possibly get is I think, honestly, my dad may have been gay. And how beautiful would it have been for him to be able to live his life feeling like he could just be himself. But he couldn't. And so when you're sitting with that kind of pain, you don't have any anyone modeling for you. You don't have society supporting any healthy way of expressing and just being yourself and being accepted for who you are. How could that not? How could that not have a negative impact on your ability to just be you? And then, you add to that, his father, my grandpa, coming back from the war, absolutely with his own inability to deal with things that he's got going on inside in healthy ways. And, and a mother who, I love my grandmother dearly. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. And I was so grateful for our relationship, but not an open, caring, supportive kind of nurturing person, right? That you're very, very stereotypical, stiff upper lip, Brit, right? Londoner who's been through, the Blitz and, albeit as a child, but it's that kind of dynamic, right? So no one's talking about anything deeper than surface level. No one's modeling behavior that illustrates healthy ways of being and support. And you end up with what you end up with. And I think, I love that you're touching on generational trauma, man, because it's a real thing. And there's so much. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to sit here and go into the weeds as far as studies and reports and stuff go. I've read enough of them to know that increasingly science is beginning to understand how our coding is enshrined in our DNA, and how that coding transmits generationally through the years. And so, what James Gearing is carrying today is as much James' own experiences and his own life as it is, your forefathers and foremothers and your ancestors and the things that they've experienced. And so I'm really, I have a better understanding now of, why I was living life the way I was living it up to a certain point. It's as much my own stuff as it is the stuff of my ancestors.
It really is interesting. I mean, when you hear the old, argument of nature versus nurture, as we sit here now in 2025, the answer is yes. It's nature and nurture. And with the whole epigenetics understanding now, we realize that, we used to be told with DNA was DNA and it was set and that was it. But now we realize that it can actually morph. And so, for example, people say, well, there's a history of alcoholism in my family, and therefore kind of the subtext is, well, I'm doomed to get it too. That's not the case. There's a history of trauma in your family that created alcoholism that absolutely is shaping the DNA as well. But as much as it turned, it pushed towards addiction, it can absolutely be turned to be, pushing away from addiction as well. So I think understanding these dominoes and realizing that you can stop them. I think this is the most exciting argument for kind of our generation is we can do the work ourselves so that we stop passing it on to our children. The buck stops here, as it were. And is it a perfect, period? Absolutely not. Of course, there'll be some seeping into that next generation, but you absolutely can minimize the effect, but only when we look in the mirror. And then I think then you look beyond the mirror and then forgive yourself for the upbringing that you have, and then forgive your parents for the upbringing that they have, and realize, as you said earlier, for example, if there was a world war that British and Americans and Australians and obviously, all the other allied nations and then the people on the Axis, Canadians, exactly, that they were all a part of, that's only really 2 generations back. So of course there's going to be a ripple effect. So I think that talking about World War II from a mental health point of view is an extremely important part of this equation, because yes, your own childhood may have been X, but as you said, our grandparents' generation were being bombed in London or were flying over Germany or whatever the thing was. And that doesn't just go away. So it's really interesting as I start exploring everyone's early life and then generations back, you see these same things over and over again. Sometimes grandma and grandpa were absolutely fine, but more
Yep.
often than not, of course, there was a massive toll for their service.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I've been, fascinated by as well is like, okay, my history is my history, your history is your history. Right. And, if you, they're obviously very different. But not everyone has a history where there is, enough of that sort of generational trauma, that inability to express, that bottling up of all of the emotions and the feelings, and not being able to just be real and be authentic and be true. Not everyone's had that experience, and I appreciate you touching on that. The other thing you mentioned, sort of alcoholism and addiction and that sort of thing. There's a Canadian psychologist, Polish Canadian psychologist named Dr. Gabor Mate. Are you familiar with him?
Very familiar, yes.
Right. Love his work. He's a recipient of the Order of Canada, which is our nation's highest civilian honor, and for his work in childhood psychology, childhood trauma, and that sort of thing. And he's all over. If you're on Instagram and and your feed is anything like mine, you're going to come across various interviews and bits. But he says one of the things that he talks about is addiction, whatever it is, whether it's gambling, sex, porn, drugs, whatever, alcohol. There's a delineation between how you treat addiction and how you treat the underlying reasons for. Right. So you treat addiction by detox. Right. The detox detoxifies the physical symptoms. Like if it detoxifies the body from the dependency on whatever the substance is, right? That's how you deal with drug abuse. But it's the underlying piece, what that's driving that person to drug abuse, that ultimately determines the success of that person's outcome, right? And so you can throw as many people as you want into detox programs, and yes, a lot of them will also have some mental health supports in place, but unless those supports create the relationship necessary between the patient and the therapist to allow that patient to feel safe enough to really open up and really start to dig into the root of all of the pain, the success rate is going to be very, very low, as statistically I think is probably proven. I don't have studies to show, but I'm willing to bet if you Google it enough times, you're going to come up with really low results in terms of recidivism and that sort of thing. And that was something, that relationship, that creating that environment of safety, that was something that I came to truly appreciate and understand when I entered into therapy. I didn't go into a program. I found a therapist near my home that former police officer, and she very quickly established that safety for me, and all of a sudden the doors could open. And that's where we're missing things, I think, as a society collectively. Is, like in British Columbia, for example, the government of the province of BC, and for American listeners, our provinces are like your states. The government of the province of BC has recently rolled out mandatory drug treatment. Right. So there's legislation that allows police officers and other authorities to compel people into treatment under the Mental Health Act. Okay, cool. First of all, there's not enough beds, but secondly, does the program have enough supports in place and a modality or a series of modalities available to ensure that those that are being compelled into treatment can dig in at those roots? And I think that's ultimately where the gap exists in the mental health conversation overall. And I think it's shows like this, and like mine and others out there that are starting to make this easier to talk about, and just like, hey man, it's okay. You can have a bad fucking day. And we can talk about that. And I'm really grateful for those conversations.
When I wrote
I was rambling. I rambled. I'm sorry, James. I rambled.
No, it was good though. And I think, I love learning from Gabor Mate, and there's another guy, Johan Hari, who wrote Chasing the Scream, who I think is phenomenal. One of his quotes is, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And I think that's absolutely, 100%. But nice. When I wrote my first book, there was an analogy I came up with, because we always talk about, your cup, your bucket, your backpack is overflowing in the mental health thing. And I was like, well, how does that apply if you put it in the world of addiction? There's no real way of making that analogy work for the addict. So I was thinking, well, what about if it was the reverse? What about if there was that bucket always needed to be full? And so you start off as that, giggling little infant, and that bucket's full, and there's no perforations at all, and it's full of just, pure joy, everything that you need that's healthy for a child. And then you have childhood trauma. And then as you progress and you get a little bit older, now you start leaking some of that fluid because there's some holes in the bucket, and then there's bullying, and then there's maybe some shame because you're not matching up to, what the parents' expectation are, or one parent left and now wasn't I good enough, and there's all these holes, being punctured. And now there's this need to fill the bucket. And so now you're scrambling for that thing. Is it alcohol? Is it gambling? Is it overtime? Is it, what is the thing? And so, like you said, when you remove that filler, you still haven't plugged the holes. And so I think this is why, exactly like you're talking about, when you start addressing some of the holes, things start leaking out at a slower rate. Now you have the energy and the capacity to start replacing some of your negative coping mechanisms with positive coping mechanisms, which then further start patching the holes. So, I mean, yeah, if you just simply remove the thing that you are addicted to, you're just leaving a void again if you haven't addressed the thing beneath the thing, as they say.
Have you ever watched that show? I don't even know if it's still on anymore, but my wife and I were sort of transfixed by it for a period of time in our lives, called My 600-Pound Life.
I haven't watched it, but I've seen little mini clips of it, so I'm aware of it.
I've
run on those patients numerous times in real world.
Yeah, right, exactly. And a big part of I think everyone knows the show, right? The idea is someone who is morbid, like beyond morbidly obese, I guess, but like super obese, is eligible for this stomach shrinking surgery of some kind. So they have to go see this particular doctor, and as part of the approval process, they have to also agree to go into therapy to address, again, the underlying root for the addiction. In this case, it's food, right? And same thing. It's you'd see the end of those shows. You were always rooting, like, come on, give me the happy story. Like, show me the 6 months later and they're doing great story. And those were few and far between, largely because the hardest part of that process is the ability or the strength necessary to commit to staring at your demons directly in the eyes and allowing whatever feelings arise, whatever thoughts arise, whatever emotions arise, allow yourself to sit with those feelings and allow them to move, allow them to flow, allow them to be expressed. And that's like, people talk about the fear of public speaking as like the number one fear. Like, you can take hardened, battle weary soldiers and put them on the battlefield, or, big rope climbing, tofu eating firemen, and put them in the, 5-alarm fires, and they're fine. But the minute you put them in front of a room full of people and ask them to talk to those people, they're like, oh God, this is brutal. I think that is probably secondary only to the fear of remembering some of your toughest experiences personally. And I was reading an article in Psychology Today a few days ago, last week actually. I actually texted Steve about this because I thought he'd get a kick. He's a Marvel fan as well, and this psychologist wrote an article about the movie Thunderbolts,
Great film.
which is the great film, and if you, I don't, well, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, but the way that film addressed, and this is what the psychologist was writing about in his piece in Psychology Today, the way that film addressed trauma and healing from traumatic experience, and specifically through the way they illustrated, the cognitive behavioral therapy modality, or CPT or CBT processing, through the way the film was master. I thought it was absolutely masterful. I'd never seen a film do that before, and I'm sure there are films out there that have, but I'd never seen, and certainly not seen, a film that has as broad an appeal as a Marvel movie does. Anyway, the psychologist wrote in there, because he was like me, I guess, just as enamored with how well they'd done this, and he said something in there that really struck me. He said, he was talking about trauma, and then there's a line that says post-traumatic stress disorder, and then in brackets he goes, a phobia of memory, a fear of remembering. And that's what it is. Like, that's ultimately what trauma healing is. That's what trauma recovery is about. It's like, and there's different modalities, different ways of helping people do that, depending upon what resonates most for them. In my case, it was CPT, CBT. But it's that fear of remembering all these shitty things that you've been running from your entire life. And that's where addiction starts to creep in too, right? Like, I can't run from this anymore. Nothing I'm doing out here in my external world is fixing these things. I still feel shitty inside. I still don't feel great. I'm not happy. I can't experience joy. I don't love the way I think I should. All I have left is anything else. So I'm going to try this substance, kind of thing. And then I think it snowballs from there. I mean, for me, it was, I wasn't like drinking every day, but I was drinking, vodka sodas, like they were straight sodas, pretty well every night. Right. And then going to bed late and not getting enough sleep. And, it was like anything just to numb, anything just to help me suppress. And that's the worst thing you can do, right? Because I was running. I was afraid of feeling all of these repressed feelings. And that, to me, is probably the number one fear over public speaking, dude.
It's interesting going back to, the obese patient that is, struggling to overcome that thing. I think this is where we're seeing so much success with psychedelics, MDMA, ketamine. I'll give you a perfect example. And even though this particular example she did remember, but Johan Hari talks about this study they did where they put all these obese patients on IV nutrients. So the whole point was if they don't consume calories, they'll lose all this weight, and it would be, a huge success. And their kind of rock star of the study lost a huge amount, got down to a healthy body weight from, again, the kind of morbidly obese size. And then one day she just disappeared, stopped kind of checking in, and they finally tracked her down, and she gained a bunch of weight. And one of the scientists is quite astute, and he said, "Hey, can I go and ask her some questions?" So he's kind of unpacking what happened, and he said, "Well, let me ask you this. When was it that you first started eating this way?" And she said, "How old was it? How old were you?" And then I think the woman said 7 or whatever age she was, and said, "Was there anything significant that happened when you were 7 years old?" And she said, "Yeah, that was when my grandfather started molesting me." And so for her, when she got down to this healthy weight, she started getting noticed by men, of the opposite sex. Right. And she didn't like that. The psychology was there. Now take that same example, but now the brain has locked that away somewhere. You have no way of saying, what is that thing? The whole princess of the pea I always refer to, like, you're just on a mattress. You don't realize that 6 mattresses down, there's this pea still. And so I think this is where it's exciting for, psilocybin, MDMA, et cetera, is for some of these people, they just don't know what that thing is in the first place. They're not even afraid to face it. They don't even know it's there. They just know how they feel. And it
Right.
sounds like it's not a magic bullet, but these are really allowing people to finally get to that thing, open the padlock on that little tiny closet in their mind, and then use all those other therapies to start processing what they found. But I think in our profession specifically, we are very good at compartmentalizing. I think this is what a lot of people struggle with. And so I think that's why veterans and firefighters and, law enforcement officers are having a lot of success with this very thing that ironically is demonized by, the legal element of drug prohibition. So, if sometimes there's a element of just not wanting to face the thing, but I think more often than not, a lot of people aren't even aware really what that thing is.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm sort of fascinated by the discussion in the sort of stoic paramilitary culture around individual histories and what compels people into those kinds of professions. I was having this conversation with my therapist not long ago, and it makes me wonder if, by and large, statistically speaking, more of us in those professional environments aren't suffering from various traumas over our lifetimes, and that we seek these professions. This was my. I'm basing this on my experience, and the more I'm learning as I go here. But for me, growing up in a chaotic family environment where I felt very much abandoned and unloved by my father, and seeking out an environment of predictable regimentality and structure and discipline and uniformity, and being put in a position of trust and authority, a position, generally respected by others. I ask myself these questions a lot. And I often wonder, is there something to that? Like, I would love for a more learned individual than myself, who's perhaps, pushing a PhD somewhere, to take that on as a thesis, because I think that's worthy of some exploration. I don't know, James, if that resonates with you in any way. But it's a question I've found myself asking over and over and over again. And I would love for somebody out there who's smarter than me to help me figure it out, because I can't escape the feeling that there's something to that.
Yeah, well, I can tell you just from, hearing a lot of conversations. I'll give you a perfect example is Jake Clark, who's the founder of Save a Warrior. The first conversation we had, he really opened my eyes to the impact of this on so many of us in uniform. And the supposedly the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience score of the average, member of the military or first responder is 6 out of 10, which also aligns with the average incarcerated person. So, you have, again, hurt people, or hurt people,
Wow.
help people, depending on which road they take. But I think then when you start going down this, you're like, oh, okay, well, we're all screwed then, because so many of us have trauma. I was in a house fire when I was 4 years old, almost died. I had a massive wall fall on our car, just miss us. That's a second near-death experience at I think I was about 11 or 12 then.
Wow.
Horrific parents' divorce. So there was all these things. And absolutely, there's no question that, those factored into me, wanting to find a tribe, wanting to be part of the solution, wanting other people not to feel what it's like to be scared, to be hurt, to be abandoned, whatever the thing is. And then want to have that armor. You're a firefighter, you're a cop, there's that kind of superhero Marvel element to it as well. I think where we're at now in this conversation, which is exciting, is if left unaddressed, that early trauma absolutely can be a fracture in your foundation. Exactly what you said earlier. I've used that analogy all the time. But where there's hope is if it's addressed, I truly believe that becomes resilience and it becomes post-traumatic growth. And it's an absolute asset in uniform. You're more empathetic. You're more confident. You know, you understand the struggles of other people, and it makes you want to be able to be there and help and mitigate that issue. So this is where I think this conversation of addressing mental health at the front door, not doing some bullshit psych test that checks a box like the MMPI, because that's never meant to determine the ability of a person to be able to be a good first responder. But have these kind of counseling conversations at the front door. You're going to PT your recruits, so why not PT their mind and get them to understand the reason that you're standing here on these diamonds is you probably has some struggles in life. And some of you may have already been able to, to offset them with some healing elements already. And some of you might have just shoved them down and buried them. Yep. So understanding that, we're going to, give you some counseling sessions, just like we're going to give you some PT. And so you can start, processing these so that it absolutely will make you a better cop or a firefighter. So I think now it's not just identifying that. I think now we have an ability to really channel that and say, that is an asset, but you have to work through it first. If you just leave it, it actually will become, as we said, a fracture in your foundation, and it's going to rear its head at some point.
James, as a young guy growing up and having those kinds of experiences, when did it first occur to you? Sorry to flip the script on you here, but when did it first occur to you? Hey, gosh, there's something that's not quite right. I've got to figure this out.
So what's interesting, there was no aha moment for me. Okay. And so now we're reflecting again. So my real aha moment was like, okay, there's all these firefighters, police officers, paramedics, soldiers that I've had on the show that have been so deep in addiction or sat there with the pistol and the bottle of Jack Daniels. Mm-hmm. My reflection was, well, why didn't I? I know there's nothing special about me whatsoever, period, mm-hmm. Point blank. So what was different? Because there's something to be pulled away from that. And if I really look back, as we sit here today and we know a lot of the very positive coping mechanisms, for all the bad shit that happened when I was young, those were also, all the good things were infused there as well. So I'm one of 5 kids. I grew up on a farm in England. My dad was a veterinary surgeon, so I had nature, I had animals, I had healing. I had basically a pseudo firehouse table where we all made fun of each other, and kind of comedy was a big part. So it wasn't that I had therapy and EMDR mm-hmm. and all that kind of mm-hmm. thing. It was just that I won the address lottery. I grew up in a family that in one element was definitely not healthy, but an other element was. And so those mm-hmm. two, like I said, for all the bad shit, it got processed. Now you take someone else who they didn't have that other side. They didn't have the ability to grow up on a British farm and, be around horses and dogs. And so that stuff got buried down. That's when James and, Steve are on the same exact track. James is doing okay, and Steve starts struggling and spiraling downwards. Right. So I think there's so much value in the people that haven't struggled to reflect and go, well, why didn't I? Because it's not that you're a better human. It's not that, oh, you were just made of different stuff like you hear people say. That's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Yeah. It just means that you were fortunate enough to have some healing modalities woven in, whether it was deliberately as an adult or whether it was, by pure accident as a child. So that's what my conversations always been, is like, why wasn't I? Like, I've been dark. Don't get me wrong. I've got to a deeply depressed state. I went through a divorce, had an issue with my son getting completely illegally Baker acted as a middle schooler by his school. An act now, if they did it again, the people that were responsible would be in prison, basically kidnapped my child. Wow. So there was some, don't get me wrong, there was some fucking dark days, but it wasn't the darkest of dark. It wasn't drown into a bottle. It wasn't, think about putting a gun in my mouth. And so I think this is it, is realizing that, just like you talked about, and we'll unpack in a minute, these healing modalities do work, but everyone's toolbox is different. And mine's very nature focused. That is what seems to work for me is the outdoors and exercise and, my dog and, time with family and traveling. And, these are things that are working, but that's again through a lot of reflection. But yeah, so the point being, I never had that, oh, I'm in a bad place, I need to get help. It was more so like, why have I never gotten to the darkest places? What is working? And then also then for me, it's like, well, then lean more into that. That did work. So don't stop doing that thing. And even yesterday, as to end this kind of ramble, I've struggled very recently because my youngest is about to turn 18 and go to college. And so for the first time, we're going to have an empty home. Another layer that I never realized how awful it is. Awful. So yesterday, I was, absolutely in a massive funk, made myself go to jiu-jitsu. We went to the pool with my wife, went to Iron Legion, my gym, and did another strength and conditioning workout in the evening, walked my dog later that evening. So it's really kind of leaning back into those things. But massive monologue to explain that if you haven't been struggling the same as some other people, then reflect, why is that the case? What can you pull out of that? And then you can tell other people, look, I think this is why I haven't been, to those lowest of depths. Maybe this is something that will work for you as well, because that's it. Like I said, to just underline my entire monologue, no one person is more resilient, biologically than another person. It's about the struggles that we've had and then the fortune or lack thereof, the ability to process those struggles.
How often do you cry, man?
Oh, all the time. I'm a fucking crybaby, in a good way. And there's times where I'll put on films or songs just to get it out, because it's that tension. It's like that kind of pressure cooker. So sometimes you got to open the relief valve.
Yeah, exactly. It's I liken that feel, and I find it really disruptive. So what I've learned about myself over the last year is, and this tracks because if you ask my mom, she'll tell you I was a really sensitive kid, and my therapist says, well, she classifies me as an empath, and so but those were as an empath, your superpower is you can read everybody's emotions, and it really sucks sometimes because you can feel other people's pain. But I had buried that superpower for a very, very long time under this kind of masculine guise of what I thought the world needed me to be as a man, kind of thing, right? And so what I found over this last year is I've been doing a lot of crying. And it gets less, which is nice. So when let's back up. So a year ago, March 2024, I was going into that new year and I was like, something's not right. Like I just knew something wasn't right. And then it all kind of came to a head for me in March, and I had a complete, I went into mental health crisis, a complete breakdown. I couldn't control any emotion anymore. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I didn't know why. It was just, and then I thought, okay, well, I can suck it up through this weekend and then I'll get back to work Monday, and then I'll go to the doc next week, kind of thing. And then I was in the rec center because I like to swim as my workout. I just find so much peace in the water, and there's a quietness to it when you're underwater and you're doing your laps. And anyway, so I go through my workout, and I was completely off. Something wasn't right. And I was showering after my workout, and my brain just kicked this fun little thought in my head. Hey man, like, how everything's going fucked up for you right now? Like you can't figure it out. Well, when you get to work, just grab your pistol, load it, and then put it to your head and squeeze the trigger. And I was like, somehow I was separate from that thought though. And that was the really interesting thing. It was the first time I'd observed one of my thoughts versus identifying with the thought. And I'm also fortunate enough that I had distance from the time that thought occurred, and the means of executing the thought. So I went home and I collapsed on the floor and told my wife, like, I need help. Like something's not right. And so all to say, I started into therapy in earnest a couple of weeks after that, once I found the right therapist. And as she started right at the beginning, kind of like you did, man, like, so tell me about your parents, right? I'm like, are you kidding? Okay. And right from there. And so as the weeks progressed, and I'm going through therapy every week, and I'm journaling every day, and um, more and more and more, like, at the end of every day, my wife and I do this really cool thing on our deck. We always debrief our day, and we've been doing this for, I don't know, like, I want to say close to 10 years. And it's just become a regular part of our existence together, where we get together and we spend 2 hours, 3 hours, literally just talking. We'll have a glass of wine or something like that. We'll just talk, and I love it so much. It's become such a huge therapeutic tool for me. But it's during these, and I would just completely cry. And she's a very stoic woman, and it was, I think, really difficult for her initially to see a husband who would only cry at, like, war movies, you know what I mean, or about his daughter, and otherwise not really express any emotion in any meaningful way. I think it was really difficult for her in the onset to see all that, and it was really difficult to do because it's super disruptive, right? Like, all I'm trying to do is just, hey, how's it going? How, talk about my day and talk about what I've been thinking and feeling and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, all this emotion comes. And so, like you, I'm absolutely a crybaby for all the right reasons, but it's been getting less and less and less. Like, it's fewer and further between, which is really, really nice. But that's what I've been finding is the challenge, is like, allowing, and it's easier now, but allowing that emotion to move, right? Because my mom describes it, energy in motion. That's all it is. It's your body's got stored up energy and it needs to move it out. So allow it to move. And the more you do that, the more you feel your feelings fully, as many times as you need to, the more you heal whatever it is that was the source of those, that sadness, that sorrow, that anger, that whatever it was, right? The more you allow yourself, is, again, my experience only, but to move that emotion, to move those feelings, that's where the healing truly is. And now it's just kind of irritating. It's like, I'm like, I'm good. Like, I'm good. I'll talk about all this all day long. But every now and then, like earlier in the show, right, I'm talking about my dad, and okay, great, here it comes again, right? Like, because I feel a sense of sorrow for my dad and for the life that he could have led but didn't. And feeling that emotion, just kind of allowing it through and being okay with it. That's where that's where my work is right now. Like, just being okay, just, yeah, man, I'm just going to have a bit of a cry here. Give me a second and move on. So I'm glad to know that I'm not alone here, James, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. And it
Speaking
goes
of monologues.
Whatever, you're the one supposed to be monologuing, not me. But no, I mean, I think this goes back to the whole empath thing. And again, this is one of the massive realizations I had a few years ago now. In my profession, arguably even more so in yours, in law enforcement, there's this facade, and I think it's the generation that we grew up in too. We grew up with the action heroes being the stone-faced bodybuilders, the Stallones, the Rambos, the RoboCops. But if you actually listen and look at who raises their hand, especially in the first responder profession, these people are doing it because of kindness and compassion. It's the yin and the yang. It's not just the white circle, this kind of, just go punch everyone in the face. There's a kindness and compassion and empathy that sends you into service in the first place. And then you get in there and you get beat down by all the things, and you sleep deprived and, organizational betrayal and all these other things that really compound. And then there's that, compassion fatigue. There's that loss of that kindness, compassion, and empathy, which is bad for the public if that happens to them, but it's also bad with us. So, for example, you cut a family of, out of a minivan that was killed by a drunk driver who's now sitting on the curb feeling sorry for themselves. Yeah. In that moment, you've got to be stone-faced and you got to get the job done and get those poor, deceased people out of their vehicle. But then once you go home, you've got to allow yourself to feel, because a normal human being would cry after that. They would be affected after seeing such a tragic end to these people. So I think it goes back to that. If you look at us as infants, if we're hungry, if we, got our nappy is dirty, whatever the thing is, we cry. It's, stimulus and effect. It's no different when you're an adult. When there's something sad, when things are built up, crying is the most, innate way of letting some of that out. So I think that allowing yourself to feel when you're in uniform after the job is done, you've been in that, work state. If we just bottle it up and shove it down, eventually, that pressure cooker is going to explode.
I was having this very conversation with a friend of mine, Chris Luttrell. He's a former police officer in the state of Washington, Kennewick, and a former Air Force veteran as well. And we were talking about sort of the line between stoicism and the importance of feeling those feelings, right? And he's like, well, where's that line drawn? And for me, I said, like, in the imminency of the circumstance, you have to respond. That's why you're a first responder, not a reactor, right? You have training, you have skills and abilities that allow you to respond to this circumstance appropriately. But once the imminency of that or the severity of that circumstance has subsided, right? It's safe again, right? The fire's out. The intersection's cleared. The suspect is in custody. Whatever the circumstance is, the bad guys have stopped shooting, right? Whatever that circumstance is, okay, fine. That you need to be stoic and you need to be able to respond, right? You need to get the job done. But once that's done, there absolutely needs to be space afterwards to do exactly what you're describing. And that's feel all of the natural, normal, healthy emotions that arise as a result of being in a really shitty circumstance. And let's be real, even if you're fighting with some idiot over, sorry, I don't mean to use judgmental language like that. But even if you're fighting with someone over a relatively minor offense, and it takes a little bit of, they're resisting, takes a little bit of time to get them into restraints and into the back of the car. You as a law enforcement professional, you look at that and go, that's par for the course, not a big deal. But it is a big deal. That's not normal human behavior. That is not a normal day for anybody. And Steve talks about this. Farina talks about this, kind of the piecing the pie of society, right? And so collectively over years of evolution, humans have decided that, okay, a certain part of the societal pie, we need you to go over here and do these things so that we don't have to, because they're really awful, right? And there's an obligation to the people that go into that piece of the pie and do those awful things. There's an obligation to make sure that they feel as safe as possible every single day. And that goes beyond just like giving you the necessary training and tools and equipment for your job. It's this kind of thing, right? Making sure that you have the space after the call and the threat has subsided to feel your normal human emotions about that circumstance and be totally cool with it. And we're not there yet.
No. Well, especially if you look at the American Fire Service, we work them so much more than everyone else. So you take that piece of the pie and you say, hey, we're going to ask you to do extraordinary things, even though you're ordinary people. Here, then we're like, and then we're going to give you the worst working environment you can possibly have to double down on the fact that you're probably going to die way before you should, So this is such a hard pushback. And I'm actually lecturing the end of this week in Florida to our state union about this very thing, because we're finally starting to get it in Florida, and we're seeing departments changing because we've got a recruitment crisis. Because, what's happening here is young people are going, well, look, you clearly are not taking care of your firefighters or cops or, paramedics. We're not going to join your profession because we value our physical health, our mental health, our relationships, our time at home. And so, figure it out or you're not going to have any of us. So, now it's nice because they're being forced to do that. And I think this conversation now is really starting to become more present within departments. Is that, yes, this, as I said, that white circle, now you go to the transition when people leave our profession and you have this massive identity crisis because I've been this, faux stoic, because I mean, real stoicism is understanding this stuff. the faux stoicism is the Stallone Schwarzenegger. I'm just a cop, and then you leave and like, well, no one gives a shit anymore. You don't have the uniform, your ID doesn't work. The people that you thought loved you, a lot of them have already forgotten about you. I hate to tell you. Yeah. And that's a massive identity crisis. So having this conversation that we are human beings in a uniform rather than firefighters, cops, or whatever the label that we're given, I think really then allows you to feel the things that you need to feel. You go through a divorce, you're going to have a reaction. Your favorite dog dies, you're going to have a reaction. You cut a minivan full of children out of a van, you are supposed to have a reaction. And I think I had a pretty interesting experience just over a year ago now. I was in London on a plane, just getting ready to take off from Heathrow. The doors are closed and they hadn't taxied off yet. And the last passenger face plants in the aisle, ended up working a code on the plane. And it was one of those ones, I say this a few times on here, you see these news stories. Oh, there was 30 cardiologists on their way back from a conference. No, there was no one on this plane that had an emergency background except myself. And there was some other bystanders that had done CPR, and the cabin crew had been taught, the basic stuff. So don't get me wrong, it wasn't single-handed. There were some amazing good Samaritans, but I was the one running the code. I was the only one that really had this level of experience. And so we worked them. Then the London Fire Brigade came on for, again, very minimal EMS training. And then ultimately London Ambulance came on. And then I finally handed them off, washed my hands and went and sat down. And I felt a totally different experience than I used to when I was on my crew, because now I'm a civilian. And I went and washed the blood off my hands and sat back down on my seat. And then I was like, kind of knocked me sideways for a bit. And I'm like, what is going on? And I was like, well, oh shit, this is what you're supposed to feel when someone dies right in front of you and you fight to save their life and they still die anyway, So it was really interesting because we get in that groove, whether it's law enforcement or fire or EMS, where you're just doing your job. And then you have this exposure, like this is how one code is supposed to feel. There's times where we had numerous codes in one shift, So just again, bit of a monologue, but understanding that every single time, as you said, whether it's a massive tragedy or just simply going hands-on with someone, that's supposed to have an effect. And if you don't process that effect, it builds and builds and builds and builds. And then the next thing you turn around and wonder why you're struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally right. Totally right. I've had my own, like CPR dead guy experiences, and that's one of those things that I had to unpack as well, because at the time, you're just doing what it is you're required to do, you're trained to do, and then that's it. And this was at a time in our evolution where these things weren't really talked about, right? Like at all. And so you just carry on, and it's the reality is you've watched someone expire, and that's not a normal day for anybody. I don't care what uniform you're wearing or not, or what you're doing in that day or not. That's not a normal experience, and it's okay to feel whatever the feelings are that arise. And that's the key, right? Is if we can do that, if we can feel comfortable, particularly as men, if we can feel comfortable enough whenever those feelings arise, just to express them, if we can have that behavior modeled for us consistently enough by other men, and have it supported by women as well, because I think that's another part of this discussion is the male relationship with the female, and having a need to feel supported. At the end of the day, we all want our moms, right? And like, most daughters want, the support of their dad. It really boils down to that. And so the more we can do that collectively, and the more consistently we can do that, I think the faster we're going to evolve into a species that truly is heart-led over mind-led. And that I fundamentally believe is the next natural evolution for the human being in general, is to go from, all of our top brain thinking ways of behaving into a more heart-centered way of existing. And this is, I think, you and I and other members of our generation are kind of, we're alive at a really cool point in terms of humanity's evolution. We're kind of the baton holders, right? Transitioning from, the generations of our parents, so the baby boomers and the great generation before them, to, the millennials and the Gen Alphas and whatever it is that's coming next. And I can't keep track of all the alphabets out there, but I think Gen X is in a really amazing position to break cycles, like we talked about right at the beginning, to break cycles, generational cycles, and in so doing, hand that baton off to the next generation to really expedite that evolution from mind to a heart-led species. And I think that's also why we're seeing, really bizarre geopolitical times, right? We've got world leaders. I'm not trying to get political here at all, by the way. But let's be real. We're in a very strange time as far as the world and how it's ordered and the way nations interact and collaborate with one another. And I think it's all part of a grand evolutionary plan and design. And it's a cool, it's weird and strange and depending on your perspective, fearful as it may feel at times, it's a really cool time to be alive, man.
I've said this recently. When we talk about evolution, a lot of times we'll look at technology, innovation. So, the Industrial Revolution, the computers, AI. But I disagree completely. I think the evolution of mankind has been kindness, compassion, and empathy. Because if you look at a lot of, more basal species, it's there, but I think, it's been amplified. And going back to our grandparents' generation, a lot of those men and women from around the world got on planes and ships to go protect a group of people in Europe that were being oppressed. And that is, the biggest message. But then what happened since, and I've said this, one of the most mind-blowing things is how you can go from World War II, where people of all colors and creeds fought side by side, to the 1950s in America, for example, where they're hanging black people from trees and women are supposed to be in the kitchen. And so I think that where our generation really has a really exciting ability is to sift through the bullshit and stop the orange narcissists and the demented tyrants forcing vaccines on everyone and everything that we've seen in this country. Because I've said, I'm not left or right. I'm just fully aware that the way that we, air quotes, choose leaders is completely broken, because America hasn't had anyone to be excited about in the last two, as long as I've lived in this country, which is 22 plus years. So, if we just keep turning our heads away from the things that are wrong, Gaza's another perfect example. Is it a one-sided conversation? No. But has the other side gone way too far? Yes. Super easy to say, but yet people are terrified to say it, So I think that standing up, just like our grandparents did, and I did a video a while ago. Imagine if you were World War II generation and you had sacrificed your life, been away from your families for a year, watched your friends die side by side, and then you saw our generation allowing the same exact thing to happen in the Middle East. What would they think? They would be disgusted, absolutely disgusted, because this movement is supposed to be towards community, towards, stopping the bullies from rising and standing up for the people who are oppressed, regardless of their background situation, wherever they sit on this planet. So I agree 100%. I think it's our generation that really has to stand up and continue fighting for what's right, and really kind of laying that foundation of community, pulling people back together again. Because it's not a political statement to point out that the The last two administrations that we've had in America have deliberately divided the nation and set us against each other. That's not a leader. That's a tyrant,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us, advocating for a better environment for young men and young women to talk about how they feel, a better environment for people in uniform to be able to do the courageous things that they do, but also have the support so they can process that and be at home with their family as much as possible. That is absolutely our generation's responsibility. And the people of our generation are out there propagating this division and lies are an absolute disgrace to Generation X, because we should be learning from. We were the grandchildren of these incredible warriors of the 1940s that did stand up and fight for people and want to make the world better. And now I feel like some of those people of our generation have completely abused that and are actually doing the very tyrannical thing that caused the Second World War in the first place. So kind of I don't think it's a political conversation at all. It's about kindness and compassion. And even if you want to lean into the holy books, what would Jesus do? What would Buddha do? What would, choose your prophet? What would they actually do if they were here now? They would want the community to be pulled together, kindness, compassion, empathy, healing. So I couldn't agree more. The pendulum swung so far the other way in some areas where it got ridiculous. But, our generation should be the one that stands up and say, hey, we're going to be the true north. We've seen the tyranny from our grandparents' generation, and we see the potential tyranny of what's happening now. These are the leaders that we should have, whether it's the country, whether it's a fire department or a police department or border patrol. And this is, who we shouldn't have. So, but it takes a courageous voice. And sadly, it's very easy just to stick your head back in the sand and do nothing.
First of all, I just want to express my gratitude to you for using a very Canadian term, True North. I appreciate that. So Canada hasn't had a much better run as far as our leaders go. I'm not interested in having any political debate about anything, but I will say, the more our society, the more humanity continues to evolve from mind into heart. You're talking about kindness and compassion as a foundation for our way of being, the better able we're going to be to recognize when someone puts themselves out for elected office or a leadership position of some kind. The better able we're going to be to recognize who is and who is not truly authentic. Because I think authenticity is the foundation for the next great leap for mankind, living truly authentically, because we're all completely unique from one another, right? We're all the same. We're all human beings. The same blood runs through our bodies. The same bones make up our skeletal structure. The same nervous systems guide and govern our attitudes and behaviors to things. We're all the same, but we're all completely individual and unique expressions of humanity. And the world needs more of that uniqueness, being comfortable being unique, than it needs a bunch of us coalescing around some sort of identity we think is right. Does that make sense? Am I making
absolutely.
sense when I say that?
100%.
So I think the more we evolve and grow towards that kindness, compassion, heart-led way of existence, the easier it's going to be for us to read the room. The easier it's going to be for us to watch any political aspirant on any stage when they're speaking and recognize authenticity when we see it. And the more we can do that, the more we're going to get genuinely authentic people leading from that place of kindness and compassion. I mean, you also need smart people. You need people who understand our systems, our business systems, our financial systems, our economic systems, our trade systems, our military and security systems, all of those things. You need people to understand. You need smart people, but you need smart people that are very comfortable just being who they are and expressing themselves that way. And whether or not that message resonates with enough people to get them into office, is decided at the ballot. But we're, you talk about pendulums swinging, and I feel as though globally the pendulum has swung so far one way that we're seeing the exploitation of election systems. And I'm not saying it was a rigged election anywhere. I'm just saying we're seeing people ascend to positions of authority because they understand how to leverage the system for their own personal gain, not the greater gain of the collective will of the people or anything like that, but for their own personal gain. And I think we're being shown that for very, very obvious reasons, and I think we're being shown that because we're being given an opportunity to either say, I'm not okay with these systems anymore as they currently work. I'm not okay with them being exploited. I'm not okay with them being leveraged for personal gain and greed, or I am okay with it. And if, to your point earlier, if you're on the latter, or if you're in the latter part of that group, I think that group will find themselves, quote, on the wrong side of history, end quote.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'd never thought about this before, but you hear this conversation of rigged elections, but just take a step back. In the States, we have a system that is completely acknowledged that the only way you can partake in the ladder towards becoming the president of the United States is you have to take money from companies, drug companies, fast food companies, weapons making companies. So that is a rigged election because anyone with ethics isn't going to partake in that. So this is the point, is it's not about left or right. It's about the entire system has become so corrupt. That if you really want to go back to finding selfless servant leaders who, like you said, are astute or have a team of people that are astute in all these areas that we need to make sure that we're able to be on top of, you have to have a system that allows the right kind of person to rise. And we just haven't. So you get the nation divided, arguing over someone that if you gave them 1,000 different potential candidates from the country of the best leaders, the two that they're fighting over wouldn't be on that list, no matter be worth separating your fucking family for. So, this is it. If you take a step back and go, what are my values? What is most important to me? The health of my nation, the safety of my nation, the education of our youth, et cetera, eliminating homelessness, especially our veterans, all the things that are really important. Mm-hmm. What is being done? Has this even been mentioned in any of these ones that we've had? No. Okay, well, then we need to change the way that we do it. So to me, it's not politics. It's just that, divide and conquer. I had a guest made a really astute observation a while ago. He said, imagine you're in medieval England and you've got the peasants in the village arguing with each other. He said, if they're arguing with each other, where are they not looking? Mm-hmm. The castle. This is exactly it. If you're just consumed by your one party and hating on the other one, and all you ever watch is Fox and CNN, just know the castle is laughing at you. But if you all band together and say, wait a second, these decisions affect all of us, then you start looking at the castle, that changes everything. So, I think this is it. They've done an amazing job of labeling the things that we need to be talking about politics so that we don't talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's an old political leader, long deceased now in Canada. His name's Tommy Douglas, and he was the founder of Canada's the Federal New Democratic Party, which would be like so in Canada we have more than two parties. We have three, but typically two kind of alternate in terms of governance. So the NDP would be kind of like an even further left of center party than the Democrats in the United States. At any rate, so he had this expression, he called it black cat, white cat. And every 4 years, the mice voted which cat was going to be in charge. And no matter what, it was always a cat. And that's I like that my mom reminds me of this all the time. My mom is one of the wisest women I know, by the way. Shout out to my mom Eileen, who lives in beautiful Burnaby, British Columbia. She shares these little nuggets with me, but she dropped that one on me years ago, and it's one that's stuck with me ever since. And when I watch election cycles, it feels very much like that. It's like what you're saying. Well, you guys pay attention over here. Look at all this stuff that we're telling you to look at, and we'll just keep running things the way we see fit. And the cats are still in charge. Maybe it's time for a mouse. I don't know. I was fascinated. I was fascinated by the U.S. election this time around because one, I was confident that the current U.S. president was going to be successful. I didn't expect it to be as statistically successful as it was, but nevertheless, I'm not surprised he's where he is. But I genuinely believe he's there for a reason, not for any political or partisan reason. I think he's there as much as any leader is in place in various nations around the world for evolutionary reasons that are beyond beyond the political spectrum, right? I think he's there to show us, to show the American people in particular, just how exploitable democracy is. And let's face facts too, right? For you and I grew up in a generation in a time, and our parents as well grew up in a time where democracy was it. Like, democracy was the only possible way to govern writ large, and it was the model for the world. And two nations fought quiet cold wars, trying to foment their own style of governance in different nations around the world for many decades. And so when we were born, we were brought up to believe that this was it, boy. This was, it's an American-led global world order, and that'll always be the way it is. Fast forward to 2025, and we're learning that that's probably not the way it's going to be. And the world's adjusting and adapting as a result. And I think the current administration is in place to show the American people, hey, this is how this system can actually be leveraged for personal gain. Are you okay with that? You need to figure that out.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching, because one of my guests, I forget who it was now, but they made a excellent point. They said America is the poster child for democracy, and I agree. And this is where people get these two things mixed up. America is a beautiful country, and Americans actually are some of the most altruistic people on the planet. Like, if you look at the amount of donations and those kind of things.
Agreed.
And when, my feed, for example, on social media is full of American people doing beautiful things in their community. You just don't see that on the news normally. But if this, if you really want to sell this to the world, because we're not a world police, what should happen is you come up with this great kind of community leadership model, and other nations will go, well, tell me more about that. That seems to be really good. But if you look in at the moment, and again, this is both sides of the aisle that have contributed to this, we have 70% of the population that are obese or overweight. 40%, more than 40% are now obese, clinically obese. You have numerous school shootings. We have, a massive opioid crisis. We consume 75% of the world's opioids, and we only make up 4% of the world's population. And we have almost 25% of the world's incarcerated population. So when you look at those hard, cold facts, and you say our leadership model is the best, people on the outside are going, but it's not lining up. What are you talking about? And so the American people are beautiful, but we've been betrayed by these people that we pay. You got to remember, we pay their salaries. And so I think this is what I'm really seeing is like the analogy of, the pottery, let's say ghost, when the clay starts getting wobbly, it spins and it just flies off into the wall. I feel like that's what's happening now. And that is a good thing, because now people are starting to go, well, wait a second. For example, the current one, a lot of people heard, let's make America healthy again. Well, that resonates with a lot of us.
Mhm.
Absolutely, let's.
Mhm.
You know, I'm from a fire, police, military recruitment point of view. We need healthy young people. Otherwise, we're not going to protect our country anymore. And what happens? We're in June now, and all I've heard is, oh, we're going to get rid of red food dye. That's it. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
really, that's 6 months worth of work going back to what should have been done decades ago, like the rest of
Yeah.
Europe and everyone else. So this is the point, is I think really there is an awakening now. And I truly believe that there is going to be a renaissance, a revolution of kindness, compassion, empathy, community, because I think people are sick and tired. And I agree, not just the one we got now, the one we had before as well. I mean, Idiocracy was a documentary. It wasn't a comedy. It's become a real thing, even down to the Crocs. So I hope now that we're finally going to take a step back and really, and this is where the younger generation comes in. They understand this a lot more, and they're course correcting our generation of, you know, what is most important, whether it's recruitment in the first responder professions or whether it's the actual state of the nation. So now that this pendulum swung all the way from some of these extreme conversations that were being forced on us, as the pendulum comes into the middle, it goes back to, as we said, the very things from ancient wisdom, from the religious scriptures: kindness, compassion, empathy, community. Those are the tenets that the humanity has been built on. That's why we're still here today. If it's all about war and combat, we'd all be dead. You know, we would have smited ourselves off the planet. So I hope that, you know, we will have this kind of, as you said, heart-led revolution now, where we start realizing that we got to change the way that we even elect these people, so that companies can't line their pockets and they're forced upon us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And, you know, we're kind of, it's been interesting watching, watching Canadian politics in particular in response to, you know, the current sort of tremors in the relationship between our two nations politically. Canadians, God bless us. We're like not very good at patriotism. You know, we're not flag wavers. We're not, you know, you're not going to drive down the average Canadian street and see, you know, flags hanging from people's doorsteps and that sort of thing. And, you know, every now and then we rally around a hockey team, and that's about the extent of it. And so Canadian patriotism, in my estimation anyway, has been, it's a lost art. You know, the last time I remember seeing it in any meaningful way was, it was in Vancouver when Vancouver Whistler hosted the 2010 Winter Olympics. But again, it's around sport, right? Not just like the concept of nationhood. But it's been interesting watching the Canadian response to the current goings on, you know, with the tariff, trade war and whatnot, and these assertions about, you know, fentanyl from Canada and illegal immigrants from Canada and all this kind of stuff. It's been really fascinating to watch because Canadians are really gelling, right? Like they're nothing brings a people together like an external threat. You know, when you've got a sitting president of the United States talking about annexation, nothing irks, you know, 40 million people quite like that. So it's been fascinating watching that, and you know, our last government administration prior to our current prime minister's election left a lot to be desired. I think there's good argument for, whether intentional or not, that it was a very divisive regime, and so watching this new administration kind of roll out their approach and their style has been a nice change of pace as well. It's a bit of a breath of fresh air, frankly. So I'm you know, I'm buoyed by the fact that Canadians are finding their footing again as a people. It's nice to see. I would have loved to have seen what it was like to be Canadian during, you know, times like World War II. And perhaps this is that moment for our generation and the subsequent generations. You know, time will of course tell. But it gets me thinking about the sort of broader planet, and our ability to come together as one human people. And I'm not talking about like one world order and all this other, stuff that's out there on various parts of the internet. I'm just talking about as humanity, right? As human beings coming together, and I'm still not sure how we're going to do that. I think we're years away from some kind of event that might gel humanity more closely together. I think that's the ultimate evolution, though. It's like where we all see each other as the unique and very cool, beautiful human beings that we are. Whatever flag we operate under, whatever geography we find ourselves born into or immigrate to. I think that's where we're headed. I hope to see it in my lifetime. But I feel like my role is, in whatever small way I can in my small corner of the world, to do everything I can to lead with empathy, compassion, love, caring, and authenticity in every single moment of every day. And if I'm doing that and that encourages other people to do it, or if more of us are doing it, then eventually we get to where we need to be as a people. I got to ask you though, James, and again, I started to flip the script here, dude, but I was having a chat with a friend of mine the other day. Do you remember all the hubbub around the orbs and UAPs and all that sort of stuff off the East Coast in November and December of last year?
Vaguely, I think, because I know Joe Rogan, gets stuck in every time that topic comes up, but
Yeah.
it's not something that's normally on my radar.
No. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm just like, where did that go? Where are the aliens now? Aren't they supposed to be coming?
They were sick of all the politics too. They fucked back off to their planets.
They're like, we're going to
"This
hang
is
around.
bollocks."
Oh, wait, that administration didn't go the way we wanted it to. We're out of here for a while.
Well, I just want to flip it back to you before we can. I want to hit one more topic, then talk about some of your healing story after this issue that you had. But before we do, talk to me about your journey into border services, and then I'd love to debunk some of these myths that you're hearing about the Canadian border from either way. Some of the things that are a challenge, and some of the myths that you're hearing that actually aren't truthful.
Okay. Well, my journey into it isn't terribly exciting. I didn't wake up one day and go, gosh, I really want to protect the border. As a kid, I, and in high school in particular, I was gravitating towards law enforcement as a career. And through life circumstances, early 20s, I didn't find my way there directly. I worked a few different jobs doing different things, and then I ended up in the casino industry working security and surveillance, which was a little more aligned in terms of competencies. And then God bless my mom. She phoned me up one day and said, "Hey, it was customs at the time, Canada Customs at the time, and said, my friend works there. She thinks you do really well at it. You should apply. They're hiring." So I'm like, okay. So I applied and went through the process, and kept getting screened into the next stage, and then finally they called me up and said, "Hey, we want to offer you a position." I'm like, oh, okay, great. And so I started my career in uniform at the Vancouver National Airport in obviously just outside of Vancouver. It's in Richmond, BC, and I worked there for about a year and a half, including my our academy time, and then I moved to the land border for several years, right at the if across from Washington. So we border Washington, and then I moved from there into immigration enforcement, so plainclothes work. And then from there, a couple of promotions and into intelligence work, which is where I finished my career. Debunk. So I spent 8 years working in intelligence, and so my job was to run a team of intelligence officers, intelligence analysts, and part of my team's responsibilities were focused exclusively on opioids and synthetic drugs. And the landscape. I'm not talking out of school here. I'm not sharing any classified or protected information when I say it's all publicly available. But the state of things as it was now, my knowledge is a little bit dated because I've been out for over a year, but BC is the Asian hub for commercial imports, as well as, passenger arrivals and that kind of stuff, right? It's North America's one of North America's largest Asian hubs. And so the reality of the fentanyl situation is, based on my experience, is precursor chemicals are imported in large scale, large quantity to Canada, into BC in specific. They are then utilized for the purposes of synthesizing fentanyl, synthesizing methamphetamines, and then I'll say this, synthesizing those drugs in quantities that far exceed what our domestic demand would be. And to some degree, those drugs are exported to various nations, including the United States. As far as where the significant threat to the United States lies, with respect to those kinds of drugs being smuggled in to the US, it's certainly, Canada is a player, but Canada is not your biggest problem, right? So that's kind of the reality. What's been a little frustrating to watch is our government's response to the U.S. administration's stance on this. Throwing more people at the land border, and leasing some helicopters for the RCMP so they can fly around along the land border and try and spot people is probably, in my opinion, not probably. It is absolutely not the best way to address this threat that is very real and very present. And they're missing the boat, frankly, literally missing the boat, because that's where the efforts need to be. That's where the resources need to go. But it's not as sexy and not as easy to point to the public and say, hey, look, see what we're doing, by having a bunch of analysts crunch through a whole bunch of commercial data and try and find out which container of any number of thousands on any number of thousands of ships has in it a few barrels of, aniline or T-Bach 4AP or 4-piperidone, or because none of that shit's sexy, right? No one thinks that's cool. The public doesn't understand it as well as they understand, a trophy shot in front of a few bricks of Coke. So it's, from the outside looking in, pretty frustrating. I'm grateful that I'm not in that position anymore and holding any responsibility for addressing it. I did my time. I'm proud of my service, but if you really want to, in my opinion, if you really want to address the threat, our eyes need to be squarely trained on the source of those chemicals, and that means a whole of government approach to addressing the issue with our number one source nation for those chemicals, and that is absolutely China.
I think flipping it around, and I'm sure Gabor Mate, I know Johan Hari, for example, are huge proponents of this. But if you, again, like we talk with governments, if you take a step back as humanity, firstly, educate yourself on the beginning of drug prohibition. It was on the absolute failure, the back end of the failure of alcohol prohibition. Like we only know Al Capone because of, the crime that came out of prohibition.
Yep.
And you look at Harry Anslinger, and it was out of racism and job justification that even started with the reefer madness. And then, it progressed and progressed. I know our professions, we see, the ripple effect of prohibition. And so now you empower the shitbags of the world, the underworld, because you force your addicts into the shadows to get their whatever they need, as you said, whatever's going to fill that void from the worst people. And so one of the things that I think would be so effective, and Portugal's a perfect example of this, they had a massive success, is just to basically stop making addiction a crime. Now, it doesn't mean
Yep.
selling and smuggling, though. Absolutely. That's what Portugal did. They freed up all the resources to come down on the smugglers and the dealers with a freaking, iron fist. But their addicts, they poured all their resources into, mental health counseling, addiction counseling, job creation, housing. And they, within less than 10 years, went from the worst addiction crisis to the lowest. And I've never, I keep saying I'm going to look this up. I haven't yet, but either in Europe or in the world, I forget. Either way, incredible. So to me, one of the ways that you cut the head off the snake is you remove the consumer. If those people that are using fentanyl in whatever capacity can now go through a legal medicinal route because they're in the hands of the medical community, you've just cut the legs from whether it's the Mexican cartels, the Chinese fentanyl, importers. So, but you never hear that conversation. And even with the American police, why they look like they're going to war, because we've created this horrendous condition on the street. I mean, every single day we see police officers murdered left, right, and center. And a big part of that is our prohibition laws. So I think that's another really interesting, going back to the kindness, compassion, empathy, is to stop locking up addicts and empower law enforcement to, as you said, get to the source, but also cut the legs out of the consumer, like send them into addiction counseling, who then, become functioning members of society that are paying taxes and are happy and healthy.
Yeah, I on a personal level, I completely agree. So the province of BC, I want to say it's about 2 years ago now, a little over 2 years ago, applied for an exemption under Canada's drug laws to decriminalize personal possession of all controlled substances. And that includes personal possession of fentanyl under certain weight. And I had a physician, a Canadian physician, Dr. Scott McDonald, on the show. He runs the Providence Crosstown Clinic in Vancouver, which works with substance users. And he was like you, very adamant that decriminalizing was absolutely, not surprisingly, he's a physician, so his perspective is very different. He was adamant that decriminalization was an absolute necessary component of a broader set of policies that will help us address this problem. And so I don't disagree. I think you're right. I think he's right. And I think the statistics in British Columbia are starting to bear the fruits of that policy change. That was one of the things I was struggling with personally and professionally in the sort of latter years of my career. Was, here I am in charge of a team of people whose sole raison d'etre is to target, identify, and generate intelligence, helps our frontline folks seize the chemicals that are being used to make stuff that's killing British Columbians and Canadians and Americans in the hundreds and thousands. And every year, the BC coroner would produce their statistics, and that number kept growing and growing and growing despite our efforts. And it's ridiculous to think that, my small team of mighty though it was the linchpin for the overall success of those numbers dropping. That's it. I'm not naive enough to think that, but I kept hoping that, maybe just maybe, we would be nibbling away at those numbers in some way, because we were getting significant results. My team was absolutely phenomenal at what they were doing. And we were getting very significant results, and they were awarded by the agency president as a result of their efforts and success. But it's just that number kept growing and growing and growing. So what that tells me, in hindsight, of course, is that enforcement alone will never, ever be the answer. Like it has to be in conjunction with other policy changes, other programs that are made available to work. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that as time goes on here, more and more we'll see that. But the reality remains that so long as there are users, legal or otherwise, these types of substances are going to continue to be a clear and present threat to the society that they're being used in. And when I consider the source of the chemicals, the nature of the government in that country and its relationship with the U.S. in particular, it's pretty obvious to anyone who's got any sense of any of this that Canada is very much being is the battleground of a proxy war that's being fought between two nations jockeying for global supremacy, and that's unfortunate for those of us on this side of the border. But it's a reality we can't duck our heads in the sand over, and it's one I hope that we're starting to wake up to in a way that we've been too asleep to for far too long.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It makes sense. I've sat with the guy that spearheaded it in Portugal in his office in Lisbon, and we did an interview, did the second one a while ago. Mm-hmm. You just take a step back and go, well, what do these people need? And it goes back to, again, that pee under the mattress. The addiction is just the thing that they're filling the void with. So you get that person healed. They don't need that thing anymore, but you're not going to heal them by sending them into some dark alley buying whatever it is that they need. You heal them by bringing them, again, that community response, enveloping them and helping them heal. But also you got to understand that some people are just too far gone, that you can't save everyone. That's the goal. But what happens more often than not is they'll piecemeal it here. I mean, our healthcare system is a perfect example, the Obamacare thing. They'll half-ass it and then go, see, it doesn't work. And that's what they do in some of the place, in some of the cities here where they said they decriminalized, but they didn't pour money into the healing element, the addiction counseling, the mental health counseling, the job creation. When you have these people that are drowning in addiction, you don't just take away the thing or tell them they can use it without being arrested. You got to be, well, let's find out why you're using it. And let's not give you a criminal record so you can get a job and you can find housing and get you back on your feet. And now you're thriving and your bucket, those holes are starting to be patched and you don't need this opioid or this alcohol or whatever it is anymore. So it just makes perfect sense. And the real, fuck you to an enemy nation is to have a nation of healthy, happy people that are able, if they cross into your barriers. But the way you destroy the ability to protect your nation is you allow a mental health crisis, an opioid crisis, an obesity crisis. So look in the mirror, ask yourself, that little snake you've got, sticker on your car, don't tread on me. Well, how much resistance is there to someone treading on you? Are you living, the kind of life that's going to allow you to, God forbid, actually protect your family if that happens? So this all circles around again to the community, the village, the tribe. Are these decisions empowering your nation or are they destroying it? And, totally. This drug prohibition has absolutely destroyed it. So I think this is a really important conversation. If you really are an American, you value the health of your people and the security of your nation, then we have to turn this around, because there's an 80+ year longitudinal study of if it works. And clearly it doesn't, because our streets are ravaged with addiction and gangs. So it's time to have a different approach.
Yeah, I completely agree, James. I completely agree. I don't know how long it'll be before we get there, but little by little, incremental change, right? That's the hope anyway. But you have to have the hammer. You have to have the hammer on that large scale stuff, right? Like because it's being leveraged as a weapon.
100%. And this is the thing, like, rather than a completely overtaxed police force, you stop them having to arrest addicts. Now we saw this in Portugal, the court system, the resources, everything gets focused on the dealers and the smugglers. Boom. Yep. Now you've outpowered them. So I know we're getting short of time. I just want to kind of revisit. You mentioned about the struggles a year ago. You mentioned about finding a counselor. As we sit here now, what was your own personal toolbox of things that you found that have really allowed you to come out of that, that inner monologue of considering the pistol to where we are sitting today?
Um, Obviously having a support network, is a big part of that. My wife has been an absolute rock, just an absolute champion, throughout, my mother, my sister, as well. Like, having, and having friends kind of step out of the woodwork that I didn't expect would be there for me, where other friends didn't. You know what I mean? Friends I expected might faded away. Friends that I didn't expect stepped in. So that was huge. But personally, I've said this on another show as well. There's 3 wins a day I try and get: a physical win, a mental win, and a spiritual win. So every day I get up and journal, every single day, even if I don't feel like it, even if I don't think I have anything to rattle out of my brain. I get up and I just start writing. And it's amazing how many pages you can fill up when you just start and let go. So I journal every day. That's my mental win. Physical win. I love to swim. So I try and get 1,000 to 1,200 meters in a day. Help the body, in a healthy way. And spiritually, I sometimes fall down on this, but mindfulness practice throughout any given day. I try and bring mindfulness to everything I'm doing, but I also try and carve time out to meditate. And what I find that allows me to do is I mentioned kind of closer to the top of the show, that suicidal thought I had. It was the first time I'd observed my thought as an observer, versus as part of my identity. And meditation has allowed me to strengthen that, to the point where, for the most part, depending on the circumstances or the external kind of, I hate using the word trigger, but the external triggers that are going on, for the most part, it's allowed me to observe all of my thoughts and not seize onto the negative ones and just allow them to float. Like so many clouds in the sky kind of thing. And it's those tools for me that have been absolutely fundamental to my recovery. And, they're not, everyone's going to find their own mechanisms, but, I think, journaling overall is probably one of the most helpful things that anyone can do. It's amazing how receiving and welcoming an empty page is for anything you're thinking or feeling, at any time, whatever that works out to be for you in terms of schedule and routine and that sort of thing. But, it's been huge. And I have regular check-ins with my therapist as well, just to make sure I'm staying level and steady.
It's amazing that you had that insight about observing the thought. I do headspace quite a lot, meditation, and the program I'm doing at the moment is called Restlessness. And Andy Puddicombe literally talks about that. When you have these thoughts, just go, oh, that's a thought. And just having that moment really shuts down that monkey mind. And I have like crazy monkey mind, monkey on crack. But you observe it and then you stop fighting it. But,
Yep.
well, I've talked about this, and I'll keep this very brief because I know you got to go. The terrifying thing that you hear from so many people with that whole suicide ideation is that their reality becomes distorted after that perfect storm of all the things that we've discussed. And they truly believe, for example, that they are the reason for their family's pain. And if I just remove myself, so the ability to just be able to step back and see that voice for what it is rather than your entire reality. I mean, that little chink there, was for you was life-saving. If you'd been totally
truly
in it, you could have gone to the office and done what it told you to do.
Yep. Truly. And that's the key, right? Like it's, I use the bus bench analogy. So you're sitting on the bus bench and you're watching cars go by, and then a bus go by, and the cars go by, and the cars go by. You don't have to get in any of those vehicles. You can just sit there and watch them. And that's what your thinking is. Your mind does exactly what it's meant to do. It's an analyzer. It's a problem solver. It's a solution giver, right? So it will always do that. You don't have to control it. You're in fact not controlling it. It's just doing what it does. And not dissimilar to, your heart. You don't will your heart to pump blood around your body. You don't will your lungs to suck in oxygen and expel carbon dioxide, right? They just do what they're designed to do, because the human body is a perfectly designed organism, and it has everything available to it that you need to survive, including your mind. Your job is to recognize that you are not the components of your body, just as you are not the thoughts of your mind. You are the observer of all of it. And the moment I remember this moment, I stepped into it so clearly, man. The moment I stepped into being fully present in every moment, everything changed. Absolutely everything changed. And now that's kind of where I reside. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Well, for people listening, just so I can round off and let you go, where can they find you or reach out to you? And then what about the 10-8 podcast?
Sure. So the Team 10-8 podcast is available on all your platforms, just as this excellent show is. And James, thank you so much, man, for having me on. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to sit and chat with you this last while. And I hope we get to do it again. But you can check out the podcast. We're online, team10.8.com. We're on all the different platforms. Social media is at team10_8. You can find me on LinkedIn at Christian Lane, and on Instagram at The Real Christian Lane.